Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dutiful Future. Yes, another episode very close to the last one here. And with me today is the fantastic Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, podcast and YouTube channel, of course, as well as the author of a book called God is Not a Republican, Benjamin P. Dixon on Twitter. Ben, hello.
Hey, my friend. Thanks so much for having me. I am genuinely excited to be here and share with you.
Well, thank you so much. So, firstly, for those who are, unfortunate enough to not have been acquainted with you so far, would you like to please describe, what it is that you do and what your politics are?
Yeah, man, I run my mouth for a living, and that's why I'm excited to be here to talk because I am, I get to talk crap all day long. I'm not sure your show rating. So let's say I get to
Say
talk
whatever
crap.
you want. Go.
I get to talk shit all day long about stuff that matters. Like the stuff that I think that doesn't matter is really American politics, but I think what matters underneath it are the universal truths that we could pull out of it and use it to push us towards the future, which is why I love the name of your podcast, Dutiful Future. Like we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we have a future in the first place, but then we have to work even harder to make sure that we have a pathway to the future that is meaningful for as many humans as possible. So while I do dig into progressive politics and I get into the schadenfreude of the day-to-day news cycle, I always try to bring some universal meaning to those stories, or at least lessons from those stories, so that we can push ourselves towards a dutiful future.
You amazing. Like that? That's better than any intro or anything I've ever done on this channel. If you don't mind, I'm going to make that clip just my my channel trailer, if that's okay. Yeah. It's just going to say that.
That's great. Do it.
How did the Benjamin Dixon Show began? How did you enter the online political world? What spawned your amazing work?
Yeah, man, it's a combination. I would say there are three major flashpoints. One was my wife being tired of me just always talking politics around the house, right? And my wife is very supportive. She's my partner in this. She pushes me and she helps manage, make sure that I'm not making mistakes on my calendar or with the IRS. So, but she got tired of hearing me talking politics. She was like, "You need to start a podcast." Then my little brother, who has been really active in these spaces, has been a huge Young Turks follower since like they started. We used to talk politics all the time. He was like, "Ben, you need to start a podcast." And then finally there was a guy who recently passed away, and I definitely want to give him a shout out, Clark Garrison, down in Atlanta, Georgia, who insisted that I join his online radio network to just get something going, because he really believed in my work. He was the first person to interview me about my book, God is Not a Republican. And he passed away recently from complications with cancer. And but he was really the person who kind of just stayed on me to make sure that I actually went about it. And so finally, back in the December 2014, I was like, you know what? Let's do it. So those were the three people I would say are the most to be credited with me getting this started.
Wow, amazing. So let's just dive straight in here. You're here today to talk about a lot of political issues, but the main one we're going to be starting with is Bernie or bust. We're so close to the election now. There's been a spirited debate in left-wing circles about Bernie or bust, whether the progressives should be riding with Biden. And I'd just love to hear your sort of journey on this issue. If your position's changed at all and where we're at now.
Yeah, no. So I am the last person to want to support Joe Biden. I really dislike his centrism, and I am was a firm Bernie supporter. But we're facing an existential crisis with Donald Trump. We're facing a crisis of democracy. We're facing the possibility of this democratic experiment in the United States failing because of the narcissistic megalomania of Donald Trump. And so while I firmly understand and kind of empathize to a certain degree, I empathize with people who are still Bernie or bust and have decided to bust, right? They've decided to burn it all down. I don't have a lot of negative words to say towards them. I might have some criticisms of them because I identify with them, but I see Donald Trump as too much of a threat for us to sit on the sidelines. We have to get rid of him.
So, a few months back, you wrote a Guardian article called was it Joe Biden needs black voters, so why does he keep insulting us? Has this been like a very tough journey to have? It's a very difficult decision to come to actually go, you know what, fine, I'm doing it, baby. I'm coming to you, Biden.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like that was right after he had the horrific Charlemagne the God interview with the Breakfast Club, which is a huge radio show here in the United States. And it was the comment that he said, if you don't vote for me, then you're not black. You ain't black. I was like, come on, Joe, we are reluctantly supporting you in the first place, my dude.
Mm.
We're really only supporting you because we want to get rid of Donald Trump. I have no expectations in a progressive policy platform coming from Joe Biden. So when you add insult to injury, it becomes that much more difficult to support him. But now, to be fair to my entire story and to be fair to my entire positions, I had some beef with Bernie Sanders too, that made me sit on the sideline, I would say, for the first, hell, I guess almost the first year of the primaries. So the primaries are a 2-year cycle here in the United States. And I set out the first year because of some of the same problems that Joe Biden has with the black community. Bernie Sanders also has, quiet as it's kept. There's a lot of Bernie supporters who don't want to talk about that, who don't think it's true. But, I have personal relationships with people who worked on Bernie Sanders' campaign. And he had some problems in the black community as well as in terms of black outreach and pouring the right amount of money into the black community to make sure in terms of voter outreach, offices in black neighborhoods to make sure that you get out the vote and make those relationships and build those relationships, which is one of the reasons he's lost in 2016. And unfortunately, it was one of the reasons he lost in 2020. And I'm bringing that up only to say this. It took me a while to get over some of the back knowledge that I know, insider information that I know about the Bernie Sanders campaign, but I got over it. And in February of this year, of 2020, I came out in full support. I swallowed my pride. I swallowed my disagreements with Bernie Sanders and came out in full support of Bernie Sanders. Similarly, I'm having to swallow my pride and my disgust with Joe Biden. And while I can't say I'm in full support. I'm not pro Joe Biden, but I'm so anti-Donald Trump that if people want to mistake me for a full-on Joe Biden supporter, so be it. We got to get rid of Trump.
So allow me to play devil's advocate here for a little bit. So
Sure.
Anytime you open any sort of progressive space now, I think online, you are confronted with a lot of arguments for why progressives shouldn't be pledging their support to Biden. And just to rattle off a few here, one that I think probably the most common one I see is, how can progressives or left-wing people expect to hold a stake in the Democratic Party if they simply just cow down whenever they lose? Do they not need to, be a voter base which has to be, I guess, attracted or be, sold to in order to, to win votes, to try and shift the Democrat Party leftward?
Yeah. I think that for that argument to hold water, it would have to dismiss the progress that has actually been made in the Democratic Party so far. We are having a national conversation about Medicare for all. This conversation was a non-starter in 2016. Like, we're not talking about 2012. We're not talking about, it was an absolute non-starter in 2016. It was considered far more, but it has now become in the normal discourse of the Democratic Party. And I'm sorry, it's just a reality. Nothing changes overnight with these behemoth institutions. Now, that's not a victory, but it does show progress. Here's another real victory. We have people like AOC, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Charles Booker didn't win, but he was in a good, strong position for the next race. Cori Bush, who knocked out a Democratic establishment player, Mondaire Jones. We have so many young progressives who are going up there and they are holding the line. They are establishing their own support base, financial support base for fundraising. They have their own reach and email list. Last night, Ilhan Omar and AOC did a Twitch stream that had 500,000 people watching. Right. So this is impactful. So in terms of us not getting what we want and if we give in, then the Democratic Party is going to keep doing what it wants to do. The thing is that the Democratic Party has come farther to the left than they have been. Back in 92, when I was a young kid, Bill Clinton was the crown jewel of the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton could not win a primary right now. He could not win a primary because he was too far to the right. So there has been progress. Progress is slow, and it is frustrating. But to suggest that we can't get any gains ignores all the gains that we have gotten, particularly in our ascendancy. We are on the rise progressives are starting to win, and those wins are significant wins, and it's amassing a significant amount of power.
I think, I think it is a bit of a thing. Like, a lot of people forget when you think about leftism, it is known as the eternal struggle. It is that leftism isn't fun. It is a depressing, awful slog to try and get any sort of progress. So any progress we do is a massive deal. Do you think there's like a sort of a dangerous attitude in some left wing spaces to like think, oh, we haven't won the whole thing, that's it, we're done, doomer time, burn it to the ground?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's dangerous. I understand it, right? And I do my very best, just me personally, I do my very best to be understanding of people's frustrations. And then the only time I really like kind of ditch my empathy for them is when they don't give me the same kind of space to understand me. Like, some of the leftists, they want you to be exactly where they are. And I'm sorry, I'm not. If you feel like you can't vote for Joe Biden, by all means, you do what's best for you. But for me and my house, we've got to vote for Joe Biden because, 1 in 1,000 Black people in the United States have died from COVID-19, not have been infected, but have died. And by the time Donald Trump is out of office, that number could be somewhere around 1 in 500, which means 1 in 500 Black people that you see have died. Well, I guess you won't see them because they'll be dead. Right. So I don't have the luxury. It's my personal calculus. And so I understand their frustration. But when they don't afford me the same space and respect that I try to afford them, then, yeah, I've got plenty of criticisms. I got plenty of ways to attack their logic. And I can really show them that I think what they're doing is quite fallacious. But, let's respect each other's space so we don't have to go down that road.
You said it there, you don't have the luxury to be a Bernie or Buster. Do you think that it is from a point of privilege that people feel like they can sit out, or they feel like they don't have to try and vote out Trump?
Yeah, I don't think that privilege is an insult, right? I don't think it's analogous to white privilege, right? But I think it is a privilege to say, I am making this statement, and I'm not worried about COVID-19 so much that I'm not going to try to ameliorate the damage that has been directly caused by Donald Trump. It's one or two things, right? Or actually, it could be both. It is a privilege, but I also think that it is ignoring the facts. Like, the fact of the matter is that there's probably 175,000 people who would be alive today if not for the mishandling of COVID-19, the intentional mishandling of COVID-19 by Donald Trump, right? That is just, if you look at every other nation that had any type of responsible reaction, like there's a couple other nations out there. Actually, you guys over in the UK, you had a rough go of it too, because you had some morons in power, Boris Johnson, right? And people considering herd immunity. Like, it's that kind of reckless mishandling that I think really strips away the luxury that I would have had to have a protest vote this year. I don't have that luxury because, this is cutting a little too close to home for me. Like, I've lost 2 friends because of it. And I'm still a lucky one, because as I go up and down my timeline on social media, people are losing family members left and right. So, I don't think it's analogous to white privilege, but I think it is kind of a certain type of being insulated from the current crisis that has been exacerbated by Donald Trump that allows you to ignore it.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think there's been such a reluctance amongst progressives to support Biden? I think, when you look over at the right, I think, especially in America, they're phenomenally good at falling in line. So, you look at the primaries and you see Donald Trump's winning, and then you get your Romneys and your, I guess, I can't remember the name, probably your McConnells, and they're like, oh, he's horrible, he's mean, whatever. And then he wins and they go, okay, cool. This is us now. Great. Is this something that you think is lacking on there? Or is this something that we need to try and get better at, which is just to say, right, okay, we've still got to win?
Yeah, well, yes and no. Here's the no part. I'm not falling in line with Joe Biden in the sense that I'm going to give him a free pass when he wins. Mm-hmm. Like, Ted Cruz and Mitt Romney, they have been groveling before the feet of Donald Trump in his administration. It's been horrible. It's been bootlicking. and to me, I have no greater plan. My greatest expectation, I am looking forward to it with joy, to fight Joe Biden like fucking hell on November 4th. But I would rather fight against a neoliberal than to fight against a neo-fascist.
Let's pray to God Biden's won. We're in the
Yes.
next days. What do we do the next day? You know, just to make sure that, I think, to borrow a Twitter phrase, the liberals don't just go back to brunch. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. To be fair to the kind of trauma that we have all suffered in the United States over the last 4 years, like first thing I'm going to do is take a nap. Okay. I'm going to take a nap so I can catch my breath because Donald Trump has given us all PTSD. We have seriously, we have become so desensitized that we have not flipped the fuck out that 218,000 people are dead. Like V for Vendetta said wonderfully in London, it was 80,000 people who had died from, I know it's fiction, right? But it's wild that our life is stranger than fiction. In that fiction, there was 80,000 people who died from a virus that was caused by the government, right? And that led to a full-on revolution. Here in the United States, we have become so desensitized because of the chaos of the news cycle that we have looked at 218,000 people dying and we still haven't burned this bitch to the ground. That said, I think that's a direct result of the chaos theory that Donald Trump subscribes to.
Mm-hmm.
He throws we have more news that comes out in one news cycle in one day than we used to get in a fucking month. Okay. So, while I don't want everyone to go to brunch and in the sense of, let's stand down, we don't have work to do, I'm going to take a fucking nap and I'm going to catch my breath. And then the next day, like the very next day, November 5th, then I'm going to war, man. I'm going to war with the neoliberal Democratic establishment because they are a problem. They are in the way. And I'm going to do everything I can to help build the Ilhan Omar faction of the Democratic Party, the Rashida Tlaib faction, the AOC, the Cori Bush, the Jamal Bowman. And that means we build institutional power. We build media power. We build email lists. We build everything that we can to give Nancy Pelosi and the Chuck Schumers of that party hell. Absolute literal hell, because they then will have power, and we need to not only hold them accountable, but we need to push them out and replace them with people who will actually give us a progressive future.
Well, you've heard it here first, everyone. You've got 24 hours to relax, and then we're back on it. Okay, perfect.
Exactly. Catch your breath. Go to brunch on the 4th and
beer.
Celebrate. Have a beer, have a Moscato, get your Moscato, get your mimosa, pop some bottles, dance, enjoy the night. And then we get back to work going to war on November 5th.
Amazing. So, you've mentioned a few names so far, but who do you think are going to be, the main, I guess, electoral leaders of leftism in the future? And obviously, I think Bernie's probably done now, but who knows? But he's probably finished now. Who do you think are going to be the next people to, 4 years' time, next primary, are going to be the ones to say, right, here we are. I'm here. I'm the new Bernie.
Yeah. You know what? I electoral politics requires a single person that we can, presidential politics requires a person that we can run as president. I don't really like that framework because we need as many stars as possible. The more democratized our leadership is, the better chance our movement has of winning. That said, if you're going to run somebody for president, you can't run a team. You got to run an individual. And you cannot deny the charisma and the political prowess of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You just can't. Like, whatever you think about her, she knows what the hell she's doing, and she's got a great team behind her, and she just has a natural knack for it. Ilhan Omar I think she's most certainly going to be a leader because she's weathered a storm that not even AOC has weathered. Like, she has weathered, the Islamophobia, the racism on a level like that AOC. Don't get me wrong, AOC hasn't had a walk in the park, but she has not had to weather the storm that Ilhan Omar has. And I just love her fierceness and her moral clarity. I think the future is woman, is centered around some of these women. Rashida Tlaib is kick ass, right? And I want to make sure I put this here. This doesn't mean that they got every issue right over the last 2 years that they've been there. In fact, I could think of one or two issues that they've had a backtrack on. AOC's recent, she was recently going to speak at an event that was on the wrong side of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and she had to back off on it. Right. So they're not getting everything right, but they have enough moral integrity to admit when they've gotten something wrong. And I think we recognize that sincerity as well as their capacity. I think they're the future. I think they are the future of the party.
Yeah, a few months back, I made a video on the channel called like who do I think is going to be the next Bernie Sanders, and like I provided 4 names, and the first one was AOC, and then basically also Ilhan Omar. And I think that one thing that they're particularly good at, which I think other more like progressive politicians aren't amazing, is, or at least activists or things like that they're good at, is sort of playing the politics game. I think AOC is really good at sticking to her ideals and wanting to see real success, whilst also being friendly and working with your like Warrens and people who like. I think Warren, or like maybe even like Kamala Harris, people who we don't like, but will come on our side on like certain things we want to win on. Is that something that you sort of see in like a need for pragmatism a lot of the time in like sort of progressive success?
Yeah, because here's the thing, man. Like you don't. How can I put this? You won't get the kind of progress that you want without working through the system. Unless you are kind of fancifully waiting on a revolution. Okay. So just shy of an actual factual revolution overthrowing this current neoliberal economic paradigm that also has a neoconservative imperialistic foreign policy paradigm. That's the single party here in the United States of America that both Democrats and conservatives ascribe to. That said, unless you're waiting on an actual factual revolution to overthrow that, you're going to have to work through the system, and you cannot seize power without working through, which means there has to be a transitional period. And I think the AOCs of the world represent, and the Ilhan Omar, the Rashida Tlaib, they represent that transition because they're some of the first. Let me choose these words carefully. They are some of the first progressives that have gone up there that are a direct threat to the Democratic establishment, in the sense that they're not just their policies, right? There have been progressives that have been there for a long time that hold and espouse the same policies, but AOC can raise some goddamn money, right? They can fundraise. They have media reach. They had 500,000 people watching them play in a goddamn video game last night, right? So they have the capacity to actually knock this establishment out of power, but they can't drop the hammer yet, right? If they drop the hammer right now, Nancy Pelosi is still the big dog, right? She's still the boss in Washington, D.C. And so I think they have the wisdom enough to maintain their integrity, but finesse the system while building outside of the system. They have the integrity. They are working through the system. They're not a direct enemy with Nancy Pelosi, but at the same time, they have institutional power that Nancy Pelosi doesn't control.
Yeah, I think it's quite an important point. Like when you talk about like people who are just waiting and hopeful for a revolution, I think it was quite a good point. I think made by political streamer Vosh. I think he basically said that if there was a revolution tomorrow, the left would not win. Even if you're going to take like the hardest Marxist perspective you can, you still would need to maintain, as he would describe, like a bourgeois democracy until the conditions are correct in which a proper left could win, rather than the Trump lot who have the guns, or at least most of them. And earlier you described Trump as a neo-fascist, and I think it's one of those things where, like, amongst left circles, it's common just to describe Trump as a fascist. However, when I talk to anyone else outside of these sort of circles, they seem to be very reluctant to accept the term. When they think fascism, they think organized Hitler, boots on the ground, like that sort of things. Whereas when you look at the Trump administration, you see chaos, you see buffoonery, you see, I don't know, someone with funny hair rather than a funny mustache. How do you think Trump sort of fits under the neo-fascist, or at least fascist or neo-fascist moniker?
Yeah. So I had this debate with a guy. I don't know if you know Michael Tracy off of Twitter. We had a debate about this 4 years ago, right when Donald Trump won the election, whether or not he was a technical fascist. And here's the thing. I want to start with the short answer and then give a little bit of the longer context. If we wait for Donald Trump to show technical fascism, then we would have missed all of the damage that he's done so far that draws a direct analog with fascism. In other words, even if he's not a precise technical fascist, his actions are most readily described as fascist. And here are his actions, right? The separation border at the policy. A lot of people try, and this is one thing I hate about the left, was when they draw these false equivalences that are not found based in fact. This policy of separating kids at the border, when it was the Obama administration, they intentionally built. I mean, I don't have anything positive to say about the Obama administration. Let me just start there. But what they did not do is have an intentional policy of separating families, which is an act of genocide. With right now, we had a news report came out last night. I believe it was Washington Post that stated there are 545 children out of 1,000 who cannot be connected with their families. Right? There's 545 children who cannot be returned to their parents because they have no tracking of them. That is a form of genocide. Number two, the forced hysterectomies. And no, actually, let me go back to number one. Number one, this was an intentional policy that was established by the Trump administration far beyond what Barack Obama's administration did. Barack Obama has a handful of cases where they separated people from adults, children from adults when they came across the border because they had no way of actually proving that this was their parent. Right. You had human traffickers. You had child trafficking that they tried to stop, and they separated a handful of those cases. Now, this is not to absolve Barack Obama of putting families in cages, because that's what they did. They put families in cages, but they didn't separate the children. And I'm sorry, there's a substantive difference between that, because now we have children who are being distributed in the United States to Christian adoption agencies, sending these kids to families that have been taken away from their parents. And this was an intentional policy. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't them trying to fix something that was broken. No, this is something that they created. That's number one. Number two, they have forced hysterectomies that are being performed at ICE detention centers in the United States, particularly in the state of Georgia, right? This is monstrous. This is monstrous. You're sterilizing women, and these are like, I mean, what are we waiting for? Are you waiting for a concentration camp with bodies piled up before you give him the label of fascist? These same people, I promise you, these same people who are giving us this pedantic, they're being pedantic over whether or not he's a technical fascist. They would be the same people who say, oh, well, it's not technically a mass grave, because a mass grave technically has 50 bodies and this one has 48.
A mass grave's got to be 10 by 100. This is only 10 by 99.
Exactly.
So technically, it's a minor grave.
Exactly.
It's just a very full normal grave.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but yes, that's exactly what they would do to us. And if we play that game of pedanticism, what we will find is not only the atrocities at the border have abounded, but we're going to find that the atrocities inside of our own borders, inside of the domestic issues, will have the fascism would have risen. And I'm sorry, we just don't simply have the time for those games, because the atrocities are at a level already. They're at a level already that our alarms should be sounded. So if he's a technical fascist or not, if you're waiting for him to be a fascist, a technical fascist, before you get upset, then I think the problem is with that individual.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this has been sort of the direction of the Republican Party for a while, or is this very much something there that Trump has stepped into and gone, right, we're now fascists, or at least, in practice, I guess.
Yeah.
Or is this something which has sort of been on the cards for a while, but it only took just one person to sort of let it happen?
Yeah, no, this has been the direction of the Republican Party for some time. It is a natural culmination of a style of politics that's not interested in good faith policy. They're interested in one thing, and that's power. And I think if we look at a recent flashpoint, there have been several. Like in my lifetime, there's several flashpoints that would point to this. The 1980s, the marriage between the Republican Party and the evangelical church that was constructed between 1975 and 1980. In 1976, the evangelical church voted for Jimmy Carter, the Democrat. By 1980, they had been sold completely, lock and stock, to the Republican Party, and they got rid of Jimmy Carter. I think that was a flashpoint, because it shifted from being something rooted in a certain type of morality that they could find an agreement with Jimmy Carter because of his faith, and they went to power politics. and they galvanized the evangelical vote in the 1970s, after 1976, after the Roe versus Wade conversation. I think that's an important flashpoint that put them on this pathway. Ronald Reagan and their tax policy was another flashpoint. You fast forward to year 2000 and the way they manipulated the election with Al Gore, and the way they utilized the Supreme Court to circumvent democracy in order to enshrine Republican power for another 8 years. That's another flashpoint. Of course, during this entire time, you had right-wing media on the ascendancy, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News. Those are significant flashpoints. But the most recent flashpoint that I think that we can't play down would be the Tea Party movement. The Tea Party movement, and that was in reaction to Obamacare. The reason I think that's a flashpoint is because Obamacare is most certainly a conservative piece of legislation. It is a free market based system that gives windfall profits to private insurance companies. But because Republicans are not interested in sincere policy arguments, if they were interested in sincere policy arguments, they would have supported Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. But they're not. They're interested in one thing, and that's power. And because they're interested in power, they had to go further and further and further to the right. Barack Obama thought he could outflank them and bring them in to something bipartisan, but Republicans was like, nope, fuck that. We're gonna just take away healthcare, period. And so those flashpoints that push Republicans further and further and further and further to the right, and Democrats very stupidly chasing them, trying to give them right-wing solutions to bring them back. No, that bipartisanship that Democrats love so much ultimately pushed Republicans over the edge into fascism, not because Republicans couldn't help it, but because Republicans only want one thing, and that is power, not policy that is good and genuine negotiation. They want power. So they were inevitably leading to this place.
So moving on now from the consequences of the election to what we think the result's going to be. If you look at the polls right now, generally it's Biden's massively ahead. That's at least what it appears to be. How sure do you think this position is currently? Is Biden in a very strong position, or do you think that we could be potentially reliving a 2016 style scenario?
Oh man, I'm afraid to even talk about that. I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to jinx it. The polling looks great.
If we jinx it now, I'm going to be tweeting it at you every single day saying this was you, Ben.
This was me. I did it.
You did this.
You did this, and then I'm moving to the UK. But you guys got to have a no vote of confidence in that Boris Johnson. You're like, that's one thing I'm going to answer your question. But one thing I admire about your system is that if you had the votes, you could get rid of a prime minister in a pinch. We're stuck with this moron, man. Can you imagine if COVID-19 started back in 2017, the first year of we would have 4 full years of this man's idiocy, and at least you all can have a snap election and get rid of that clown. Why don't you guys do that, by the way? Because he needs to go. But anyway, I digress. To answer your question, he's in a great position. The polling looks good. Early voting, I think we have over 30 million people who have voted early, which is shattered every previous year's record. And the demographics of the people who have shown up to early vote are favorable to the Democratic Party. It could still turn out the other way if we're not careful. So, fingers crossed, knock on wood.
There are a lot of concerns though that even if Trump does, lose, he will simply just stay in power. He talked about how he'll wait and see to, if he'll accept the results of the election. Do you think there's a concern of basically a de facto coup, or Trump just saying, right, oh no, half the votes here are illegitimate. Nope, we win.
Yeah. So if it's close, if the election is close, he won't have to do a de facto coup. I think they have enough power in critical places like the different conservative Supreme Courts around the states, the state Supreme Court level, the Republican secretaries of state. There's just so many ways that if this election is close, that they can steal this. Even if it's a close win for Biden, I don't think Trump is going to have a quote unquote coup because they have already worked out those machinations to be able to steal this. If it's a blowout, I still don't think it would be a coup and he would stay in power because even his own Secret Service is tired of his ass, and they will happily escort him out very politely, but also like, dude, you're no longer the president, and now you are a threat to the president elect. And I'm sure, and it would be, he has not fostered any loyalty amongst the institutions. He has absolute loyalty with his sycophants, his fans, but people who pull the levers of power right? The people who change those codes after he loses, and the people who give those codes to the president-elect, and then finally inauguration, all of that, he has no favors. He has no friends in those categories because he has consistently put their lives at risk in this COVID-19 crisis.
Mm-hmm. If it is a close election, and if it does come down to, you know, sort of in the like Gore Bush Supreme Court-ish, you know, situation, and it does and then Trump ends up winning, what do you think individuals can do in this case? What do you do if you see this and you just think this is ridiculous? How is this happening? The election's been decided by conservative justices. What happens? Is it just a struggle for 4 years? You know, what is the reaction to it? It seems
I'm on the first plane over to the UK, man. Move over, and you know, I'm gonna sleep on your couch because I'm getting the hell out of here.
We've got 2 couches. There's plenty of room.
But seriously, I think we have to gather ourselves. We have to compose ourselves and dig in for the fight of our lives. I think he's going to do everything he can to get rid of democracy. In practice, not on paper. It'll still always say that we're a democratic republic, a representative republic rather. It'll always say that, but in terms of voting rights, in terms of the opposition and the barriers to voting that they put in place, I mean, he's going to have a field day over the next 4 years. But I don't think we can give up because we don't know how to give up. We're very stubborn people. Humans are stubborn, and we're not going to just go quietly into the night. So I think we dig in for 4 years of the hard. This last 4 years have been miserable. The next 4 will be even more abysmal. But we have no choice but to fight.
If Trump does lose and the Republican Party sort of moves on, where do you think they're going to go? Is it going to be just another, okay, cool, here's our next, I guess, rather than a crazy neo-fascist, here's a clean-cut, smart one who acts nice? Mm-hmm. Or is there going to be, do you think there could be actually a change in the direction of the party? Back to the more, like, I guess, less, openly horrible and more, like, politely horrible? Like your master?
Yeah. The Republicans are faced with a problem that they have created a monster that is now cannibalizing their own party, ideologically speaking. Mm-hmm. And the party wants, so if they lose, there are going to be a lot of Republicans, never Trumpers, who are going to seek power in the Democratic establishment because to the victor goes the spoils. There's like literal cash to win. And so they're going to, the Lincoln Project Republicans, they're going to come looking for their handouts, all the people. So I think you're going to see a merger between the Democratic establishment and the Republican Party. You're going to have those Make America Great Again Trumpers who are going to sharpen their teeth and dig in even harder and look for somebody just as ridiculous as Donald Trump because they feel a level of commitment to this Trumpism because the cruelty is the point. They enjoy that. I think there's going to be the QAnon faction of the Republican Party that's going to continue. Whether or not they have power really depends on their organizing capacity and their ability to fundraise. And honestly, some of these QAnon sickos are winning their races. So I think you're going to find an even more extreme Republican Party. You're going to find the moderates, the quote unquote moderates of the Republican Party coming to merge with the Democratic Party, which is going to force the left to do one or two things: obliterate the Democratic Party and finally actually have to go, as a matter of principle, have to go and create another party, or they throw everything on the table and they go head to head with the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers and take over the Democratic Party, which I'm going to be honest with you is far more reasonable and feasible than going to start a third party. So I see a whole lot of fighting going forward if Donald Trump loses.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, because when you bring up a third party, I think this is one of the points that a lot of I guess you're more like Bernie or Buster people would bring up, like we talked about earlier, where like, when is the time to start a third party? Every 4 years, like people are like, oh well, we should vote for third party, then we'll have to. But it's like, oh no, we can't now.
Right?
Like for years and years, it's been oh, we want to do this, but just not now. So like,
Yeah.
is this something that you can see being a recurring problem? Like, is there ever going to be space to forge a different movement?
You know what? Diverger's law, a political science theory that basically says because of our representative democracy, the way it is structured, is that it's always going to lend itself to being a two-party system versus the parliamentarian system that you all have. You guys have a diversity of parties. And I mean, of course, it's still you still have two major parties, but you have minor parties that are able to get influence once it comes time to coalition building to form a government, right? So, the Green, I don't know how the Greens perform there, but let's just use them for example. They're able to have some influence, like if whoever they get in a coalition with to form a government, at least they're able to get some concessions, and that leaves them viable to be an actual party. We don't have that luxury here, right? The luxury, our style of system really does lend itself to a two-party system, and because that's just the structural impediments. The other impediment is the one that you point out. These motherfuckers don't come around until election year. They don't. The Green Party here in the United States, you don't hear from the Green Party on the national level until election year. And it's just enough to peel off to give people, because they know it gives them influence with 1% of this country, which is still a large number of people. And I guess I think sometimes I feel that's all the Green Party here wants on a national level.
What would you say is the biggest obstacle right now to seeing real left-wing success, and whether that means policy change or whether that means just winning some elections, or at least not some, winning more? What would you say has been the number one challenge? I mean, obviously there's like the primary level, but then there's also the like policy level. What do you think's been the biggest problem, and can we get over it?
I think it's twofold. One of them is slowly rectifying itself. The other is a pervasive problem. It's probably threefold, but I'm just going to go for two. One has been like institutional power. We did not have that for years. We didn't when Barack Obama became president in the year 2000, it was with a weakened left institutionally in terms of communications, email lists, in terms of fundraising ability. The Obama administration, they took fundraising away from smaller institutions and say, no, everyone's going to donate to the Obama administration, the Obama campaign directly, which eviscerated these smaller organizations. The year 2016 and 2020, that will never happen again. Nobody's given. I mean, there are people who are giving to Joe Biden directly, but they're not choosing to give to Joe Biden directly at the expense of our revolution. No, or at the expense of brand new Congress, at the expense of Justice Democrats, at the expense of Democratic Socialists of America. Like, there are plenty of institutions that have their own fundraising capacity and they have their own institutional power. Therefore, and then you just take AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, by herself. She's a fundraising institution and a communications institution, and that people will never surrender that over to Joe Biden. So to that end, we have rectified one of our biggest impediments to having an organized, impactful left, because since my entire lifetime, that was just 2008 when Barack Obama did that. But you think about 92 when Bill Clinton was elected, there was no national organized left with the capacity to raise $100 million in a presidential campaign. But we have that now. So it's been slowly rectifying itself over the years. The thing that has not rectified itself is the nihilism on the left, right? The defeatism that, we didn't get it this round, so let's just give up, let's throw in the towel. No, man, we are on the ascendancy. And I know it looks like we're not. It looks like we're miserable right now. But the truth of the matter is we have some key positions that when we drop this hammer, oh man, it is a progressive future that's coming.
Amazing. So what can someone, they've been watching and or listening to this whole thing, they're inspired, they're motivated, they're just dying to get involved somehow. What should that individual do to try and see this progressive future?
Yeah. Listen to your podcast. Listen to mine.
Listen to, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. But in terms of like getting out there and actually doing the work, joining organizations that are doing good work, joining, labor unions, which are coming back. People are organizing more with labor unions. They never really went anywhere, but they were weakened. And we see some strength coming back to them. Local organizations, your local chapter. Let me be honest. I was going to say the local chapter of Democratic Socialists of America, but let me tell you something. What you can do that is the most powerful thing imaginable is to join your local Democratic Party, because unless you're in a major city, that local Democratic Party that has power on the national level in terms of delegates and rulemaking, they desperately need young people who would go out there and come to those meetings once a month and get to know the people and then move up. And then before you know it, like these positions are vacant. You can get power in your local county chapter of the Democratic Party, and that power on the local chapter gives you national power, right? It gives you a voice. And so the number one thing that you could do is participate in these local organizations, labor unions, the Democratic Socialists of America. But by God, do not negate the impact that you could have by becoming an influencer in your local Democratic Party chapter.
Amazing. Well then, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming on. I encourage everyone, check out the Benjamin Dixon Show on every single podcasting platform you can imagine, on YouTube as well, at Benjamin P. Dixon on Twitter. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me. It's definitely a pleasure, and good luck with all that you're doing.
Thank you so much. You too. Thanks for watching, everyone.